When that kid comes in with alcohol poisoning, their young bodies are trying to adapt to that high level of alcohol, and literally their body is shutting down.
Think about waking up in the hospital, throwing up all over the place.
I'm tired of seeing the young body come in drunk, that I have to pump their stomach.
Tubes sticking out of you, bloody, you're not exactly sure what happened.
They're not breathing, their heart rate is very slow.
We see more homicides, we see more vehicular accidents, we see more rapes, more violent crime.
Think about being at a scene of a crashed car where a friend has just been killed and you've been the driver.
We've seen so many defendants in tears wishing that they could turn back the hands of time.
And the friend that you've been growing up with from elementary school is now dead and being taken away by ambulance while you're being handcuffed and taken away to jail.
They can die, their friends can die, they can be arrested, they can end up being brought to court, they can lose their licenses. The consequences are very extreme.
I'm sure you're saying, oh, I've heard this, and it's not going to happen to me.
Nobody thinks anything's going to happen to them. We never thought this would happen to our family. Our life will never be the same.
It's got to stop.
On New Year's, I know we had a glass of champagne.
I've had champagne at my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary.
My first drink was I was 15.
As soon as I picked up my first drink at 12 or 13 until I sobered up about 20, which was about 7 years, 8 years of active addiction, active alcoholism. I missed my whole life.
Nationally, the average age that young people begin drinking is 13 years of age.
Because that's when you're first, that's when you become a teenager. That's when you start going to parties.
It seems like there are more kids who are drinking, and it may be that we're hearing about it more, so I don't know the answer, but what I do know is that kids are drinking at younger and younger ages.
I know people who have started drinking at age 12, 11.
A full decade before it's legal for someone to be drinking.
People can go off and fight in wars. I mean, you have to register when you're 18, and then you're not allowed to drink for 3 more years after that.
Kids, they just want to grow up so much faster. They want to be given all these privileges ahead of time.
Because alcohol is so ingrained to the social fabric of our life, is so tied to how adults celebrate success very often, young people see that they're being able to use alcohol means being an adult.
It's seen on a daily basis, basically everywhere you go. They see it on TV and they think it's all right.
I mean, alcohol, realistically, is right next to the milk and the juice in the fridge in most homes.
I never really did view alcohol like harder drugs, because it just seemed like it was so prevalent.
It's just kind of thought of like a party thing.
It's legal. Everything else is not legal.
The fact that alcohol is legal psychologically plants a seed in people's mind that it's not necessarily bad for you.
I mean, think about it. You can see advertisements about alcohol. You don't see advertisements about cocaine.
It's at major sporting events, televisions, billboards.
It's what stores sell. It's in the open market, so to speak.
People don't tend to associate it as being as harmful as using drugs, such as marijuana, coke, ecstasy.
For the most part, teens see alcohol, at least what they think, using appropriately. They're not always seeing all the other consequences or after effects.
I think that there was definitely a pressure in high school. Not that you had to drink in order to fit in, because I never really felt that way, but that it was a part of life, and that if you were going to be in an environment with your friends, there was going to be alcohol present.
A lot of it is because friends want you to do it, because it's there and it's peer pressure. And you see all your friends doing it and you think, well, if I don't do it, they're going to make fun of me.
I have this one specific friend that's always like, you gotta do this, you gotta try this.
When everyone's drinking and you feel like you're the only one that's not, when everyone seems to be playing the drinking game or doing a shot to celebrate something or having a glass of champagne because they're toasting graduation and you're the only one not.
I think when it's a larger group of people, it's more of a non-said peer pressure. But when it's more of a one-on-one, it's you gotta do this, you gotta do this.
And with alcohol, because it impairs judgment and decision-making, one drink can then become 2, can then become 3, can then become 4, can then become you waking up the next morning not entirely sure where you are, not entirely sure what happened, and not entirely sure what to do next.
I've seen these shows where kids are having a lot of fun, maybe at a resort, at a pool. Then they go into town drinking lots of alcohol. But what the TV cameras don't show you is what happens afterwards. Coming to the emergency department.
I've heard of it happening, but not to anybody I know.
I know it happened to someone I know. I think they were in like 8th grade and they got brought to the hospital for alcohol poisoning.
It's getting scarier. The trends are scarier. Younger kids coming in drunk. More serious injuries. Car crashes with deadly consequences.
When we look at the top 4 leading causes of death for young people, which are car crashes, homicide, suicide, and drowning, the one common factor in each of those top 4 leading causes of death is alcohol.
There was this guy at a party. He drank a lot. The party started like at 7. At 10, he was like he's like passed out, and he's like, then when he woke up, he was throwing up, and it was horrible.
There were times where I had acute alcohol poisoning, just very, very, very sick and unconscious, kind of very sick, a lot of vomit.
Particularly with binge drinking or drinking a lot of alcohol, we lead to a condition called alcohol poisoning. This is very serious when the blood alcohol level is very high and the body is seriously poisoned by alcohol. It tries to adapt, and it does by shutting down your heart rate and shutting down your breathing. And clearly, this is a very serious and dangerous condition. These are the kinds of patients that come into the emergency room, they're critically ill, and the ER team tries to save their life.
I have had friends that I grew up with who have died from alcohol use.
All right, we're finished here. Okay, let's get them upstairs to CAT scan and up to the ICU.
Being it starting at such a young age, that specifically the brain's still developing, that with the drinking that I know I've slowed down.
You don't think of the long-term consequences.
You think it's not gonna happen to me. That's what everybody thinks.
Yeah, so I might get so smashed that I don't remember what happened last night. But that's like the only brain effect that people really think about.
Yeah, like it's scary to think about, like for that moment in time, but then when kids go and really drink, it's not the first thing on their mind.
You know, one party isn't gonna kill my brain.
The American Medical Association has done a really good summary of the research on how alcohol affects the brain of an adolescent.
What's interesting is that the human brain fully matures at age 20. Most people think that it happens much earlier in life, but actually it occurs later in life. There are 2 main areas of the brain that undergo tremendous revision during teen and adolescence. One part is called the prefrontal cortex. This is the part right behind the forehead. It's primarily responsible for decision-making and thinking. The other part is called the hippocampus. It's part of the limbic system. The limbic system is deep within the center of the brain, and its part plays a role in memory and learning.
They studied young people between the ages of 14 and 21, and what they found was that those who drank had parts of their brain that were smaller than their friends who were also teens that didn't drink.
Teen drinkers clearly show deficits in learning ability, memory recall, verbal ability than non-drinkers. And this is a very serious consequence of what happens during these developmental stages.
This is not like breaking your arm and then it heals again, or breaking your leg or getting a cut. When you do damage to your brain, that damage is permanent.
So what you're doing to your brain truly leads to severe deficits that are going to follow you throughout your life.
Because sometimes I get real spacey, and it's not because I'm tired or not because I'm overworked. It's just, my brain kind of just shuts down for a little bit and decides that we're going to take some time off.
You're going to have a more difficult time at school. You're going to have a more difficult time learning in math and science and reading and English. You're going to have suicidal thoughts.
Increase in risky behavior.
They can fall behind in school.
Depression.
They can just have a more difficult time at a lot of things that we all take for granted.
It's stuff that I expect will stay with me and won't go away, and that's one of the constant reminders of the damage and the price that I had to pay for the decisions that I made.
It's like guess, the best of the illegal things you could do because it's legal eventually. It's still illegal for you now, and then probably the next thing would be like smoking pot or something because you don't think of it as like the hardcore drugs.
Alcohol was the one that kind of really opened the gates for me, because it came to a point where I'd been drinking 2 years before I started using drugs.
It's usually the first step into the world of experimentation with other illegal drugs.
When alcohol is not enough, when it stops being enough for you to forget your problems, you'll move on to like heroin or crack cocaine or something else.
At a lot of parties, alcohol and pot go hand in hand. And then pot is definitely a gateway drug to other things.
It's not just the alcohol that's in the keg or the six-pack, but it's also the marijuana that's being passed around. It's also the cocaine that someone's older brother was able to get for them.
Once you get drunk, you might not know what you're doing, and so you take something like not thinking about what it is, and then you feel so good once you're on it that you're just like, yeah, whatever, I'll go and I'll do other stuff.
You don't hear a lot of people who go right to shooting heroin or right to smoking crack. It's usually, what did you first do? It was either cigarettes or alcohol, or both in a lot of cases. And it was never, when we started smoking marijuana, it's alcohol.
What most studies find is that for the majority of kids that use alcohol, they've started and they're in a phase that's called experimentation. They've used alcohol, but they haven't yet experienced negative consequences.
Working in law enforcement, I came across a motor vehicle accident where 3 teenagers were dead, and alcohol was reportedly involved in the incident. That's something that I don't ever want to experience again. Seeing 3 kids dead on the side of the road really affected me, and I didn't even know them. I could only imagine how it would affect those people that they grew up with, their mothers, their fathers.
I got to the emergency room and they brought me into the family room. My mind was just all over the place. I couldn't cry, I was shaking. Really wanted to know where John was. I knew Marty was there and they told me he had a broken leg and he was life-starved to the hospital. I just had this feeling something was really wrong. Kenny, the driver, who was drunk, was killed. Matt, who was in the back seat, was killed. My son John, who was in the front seat, was killed. Marty, my oldest son, survived, and he ended up getting his left leg amputated. As a parent, you just go on just to go on. I mean, no life's the same. I wake up in the morning wondering when I could go back to sleep. If John was here now, I just know that he'd be so upset for what all this has done.
The truth of the matter is you don't really know how alcohol is going to affect you. It affects everyone differently. And until you take that step, you won't know if there's a consequence that you can overcome or not.
After you come into the emergency room from a DWI, I can try to patch you up. There may be victims in the car with you, or you may have hurt somebody else, the other driver. Now comes the police, now comes the lawyers.
Obviously, drinking under the age of 21 is against the law. Every state in our country has a drinking age of 21.
I got arrested my first time at 15 for possession of alcohol.
The presumed blood alcohol level for someone who is presumed to be intoxicated is now 0.08 when it used to be 0.10. Plus, now law enforcement across this country is starting to enforce the laws more than they ever have before.
Open containers in public places, being in possession of alcohol is against the law. Many of these offenses in some states are misdemeanors, can also be felonies in other states.
We have some friends right now whose young son was caught drinking and driving, and for 10 years, he's got this on his record. For 10 years, and a lot of kids don't realize that.
I think they're more worried about what will happen to them if
Into their car.
if anything, if they get in an accident.
If a person is drunk, a teenager, and that person is driving, and someone is injured, whether the other person is in the car, in another car, walking along the street, that person can be charged with drunk driving, they can be charged with vehicular assault, they can be charged with vehicular manslaughter, they can be convicted of a homicide.
And if you think about a situation of an underage drinking party, where a young person might purchase alcohol at a store first, be in possession of alcohol, and then maybe try to operate a motor vehicle when they leave the party, and those have serious consequences for the future, especially if they're at the felony level.
Like, they don't really think, oh, I could be a felon. Like people are gonna look and be like, oh, you know, you got drunk when you were 16 and you killed someone in your car. Like, that's not the thing that crosses their mind when they think about not drinking and driving.
Driving while intoxicated can be a felony. Vehicular manslaughter is a felony. Criminal possession of a forged instrument is a felony.
Some girls that came to visit from out of town, they all had fake IDs.
What they need to understand is that if you are in possession of a license that has been tampered with to make it appear that you're older than you truly are, you are in possession of a forged instrument. All of these things carry on your record for the rest of your life.
This affects your potential admission into college, universities, financial aid. It also affects your job applications with employers.
And their lives can be totally disrupted as a result of a felony conviction.
Just hosting a party in your home with a bunch of your friends can put your parents and their homeowners insurance and your house and everything they own at risk.
People don't worry so much about their parents getting in trouble for what they're doing, but them getting in trouble with their parents, because you don't think of it as being your parents' fault if you decide to have a party while they're gone or something.
Teens reported that 61% of the alcohol that they obtained was from the parents in their household.
I know a friend, she had a couple people over on New Year's, and her mom she got them some stuff, and they stayed up in her room all night, and she was fine with it.
I think there are a lot of parents who do throw their hands up, and again, it's part of that, well, everybody does it.
Because she knew that her daughter was going to be drinking anyways, and she figured, yeah, the safest way to let her drink is to just keep her home. I know where she is.
I'll purchase the beer so I know how much they're drinking. I'll take away their keys, so the kids can't drive home. And that way, I'm controlling everything, and everything is okay.
Because I know my mom was like, oh, go ahead, here, have this, have vodka, whatever it was. Then I'm thinking, oh, so then it's okay.
Parents sometimes think that because alcohol exists in the environment and because they have experience with alcohol, that they can somehow control the experience for teenagers.
What they don't realize that is if they do that one weekend, another parent does it next weekend, another parent does it next weekend, now you've got kids going from house to house to house, having condoned drinking.
I don't think parents should be doing that because I think it's encouraging their children to keep drinking.
If you're condoning your children drinking heavily in high school, you're setting up a pattern that can lead to addiction.
Parents are doing two things that set a bad example for kids. First, they're modeling breaking the law. They're telling kids that it's okay to do this if you can think you're in control of it. And secondly, they're just setting a bad example.
If parents allow drinking in their home for anyone who is underage anywhere in this country, it is a crime. Let's say that the parents weren't at home. They can still be sued civilly, and one of the considerations is if they've allowed these kinds of parties in the past. It is kind of looking the other way with a wink and a nod, and you can't get away with it as a parent. You can't get away with it as a kid, thinking that if you are under 21, they're not going to prosecute you. We are prosecuting 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds for having these parties and providing alcohol.
They're going to be brought down to the police station, they're going to be handcuffed, they're going to be fingerprinted.
I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It is against the law, and you can go to jail. Kids are not immune from going to jail. Don't think for 1 minute that your parents are going to get you out of this, because they're not. They can't. Once the system kicks in, it's all over.
What we're hearing from young people and parents in these situations, that young people, although they might not be driving and leaving the party to go drive, they're still experiencing a lot of other negative effects. Alcohol poisonings.
They open themselves up to other drugs. They also open themselves up to potential sexual assaults.
She kind of disappeared with someone else, came out like 20 minutes later, wasn't really sure what had happened.
A young girl who's been drinking at a party comes into the emergency room. She has no recall of what happened. She wasn't aware of any of the events that took place, and she was literally raped while she was blacked out. At that time, we had to do a complete rape examination, make sure she wasn't pregnant because that would be a serious consequence. And we also had to do an examination for sexually transmitted diseases.
Drinking is a rite that kids go through as part of the high school experience, and so parents just want to kind of turn the other way and not look at it.
If you have a history of your family drinking and stuff like that, you might end up in that path, because like you're looking, you're learning, like, oh, everybody in my family does it, so why can't I do it?
You know, teenage drinking is not a rite of passage through adolescence. It's a dead end, both literally and figuratively. And parents have both a legal and a moral obligation to stop that.
My mom, she's a good mother, but yet she never talks to me about it.
Time and time again, I have talked to parent after parent who said, I didn't realize my kid was drinking.
They never really talked to me in depth about even sex, drugs, alcohol.
Parents should remember one critical factor. No teen will ever admit this, but studies have shown that the #1 influence in young people's lives is their parent and what their parents' expectations of them are. So parents need to start with the knowledge that that's true.
Even though the kid doesn't look like they're listening, kids do listen.
Yeah.
I really firmly believe that the parents are the first line in prevention.
Kids who have parents that talk to them about drugs and alcohol have kids that are 50% less likely to use drugs and alcohol, just because the conversation occurs and the expectations are made clear.
The average age that kids start drinking is about 12, and as she approached that age, we realized it was time to talk to her because she would be going to school with and certainly interacting with lots of kids who had already started drinking.
Parents they need to make sure their kids know they have like a solid base to come back to. If they're in trouble, they can come to them. It shouldn't be like a punishment. Yeah, it shouldn't be like a rock hard, you know, if you do this, you're dead.
They don't want to hear right off the bat that you're going to get in trouble, that you're going to get punished, that you're going to be grounded for the rest of your life, you're never going to be able to drive, all these other consequences.
I know my dad has had talks with me before. He's like, we've had alcoholics in our family before. If you do drink, just know you're prone to an addiction. So if you do make that choice, be careful. And I mean, it's stuck with me.
I feel concerned about underage drinking. I feel concerned about the amount of alcohol that I hear about your friends using or see your friends using. Young people can even initiate the conversation.
I think it's very, very important to live the kind of life that you hope your kids are going to live.
If they're gonna drink, they should like set an example by like drinking responsibly and not get hammered.
Once or twice I've seen my parents, it's just like, I don't want to see them like that.
They raised me in a way to be very aware of the consequences of drinking and the dangers of alcohol and that it's illegal.
Talk to them, spend time with them, tell them about the dangers of alcohol and all the other negative things that are associated with alcohol.
You have to ask the tough questions, and you may not be happy with the answers. Is there a responsible adult present? Is there alcohol going to be present? Are there going to be older kids there that may have access to alcohol? Tough questions, but ask them. You may save your son and daughter's life.
It's not a family anymore. We still haven't sat down to eat supper together. Just nothing's normal.
The thinking that this is harmless kids' play is so contrary to what my experience is of the kids who are dying as a result of this, the kids who suffer serious injury, permanent injury, lifelong trauma. It's just not worth it.
I definitely don't think of going to a party just to get drunk, just hang out with my friends to see them.
If I'm gonna have fun with my friends, I want to make sure I'm gonna remember it.
Just because the population of people you're hanging out with are doing it, it doesn't mean that everyone's doing it. That's the only people that you know.
Every weekend we get together and we go bowling or we go laser tagging or we go miniature golfing, go-karting. There's always something to do in the weekend. We always do something.
It's just fun to just have a group of friends who you could just be yourself.
It's hard to reach people like that. It really is, because they already have in their mind they need alcohol to have a good time. And honestly, if they need to drink, they don't have to hang out with me.
As long as you stick around with the right kind of people, you're not going to be pressured to. I really don't feel the need to right now. I mean, it might change when I get older, but I mean, right now at 15, I really don't feel like I have to be going out and drinking all the time.
Young people need to initiate these discussions with adults. Talk to law enforcement officers, talk to parents, talk to teachers. Let them know what you're thinking about, what you want, what your perspective on the issue of drinking is. The best changes that any of us in the public health community have ever made on the issue of underage drinking have been because of things that young people have suggested, ways that we as adults can make differences in their lives.
Just wait a little bit, live life a little bit before you make a decision to drink.